We're really excited at Amazing EV this week because we're just about to launch this incredible Tesla Roadster in very orange. License plate number Dark Star. And perhaps what many of you don't know is that it's only one of about 20 in Australia, and it's only less than probably 2,500 built in the world. And for us, that means it's a very special car to list on Amazing EV, our dedicated used EV marketplace, because we think it represents the essence of EVs as we know them today, and certainly the incredible success of Tesla as a company that we know today. Hi, I'm Roscoe, and this is Amazing EV. And today, before we go back and talk to the owner of this car and find out a bit more about its pedigree, we wanted to have a chat too and introduce you to arguably Tesla Roadster royalty. The owner of the first Tesla Roadster that came to Australia, internet entrepreneur, businessman, pilot, long-time Tesla owner and huge Tesla supporter, Simon Hackett. Simon, thanks for joining us. And look, when we first listed this Roadster on Amazing EV, it really piqued my interest, and I started to do some real background history, and I was fascinated by this car. And then I realized you're a real pioneer. So what made you go out and hang it all out there and buy an electric EV, let alone a Roadster, almost 15 years ago now?
Yeah, well, it turns out, Roscoe, that story starts probably another 10 years before that. There was a car in the 90s called the GM EV1, a kind of famous car in the history of EVs. It was the coming of EVs before the current era. And I was spending a fair bit of time in California, and some friends of mine over there had two of these things. These are the cars that, if you haven't seen it, there's a great documentary called "Who Killed the Electric Car?" that's about
I'll
this.
go back and do some more.
Yeah, GM were forced under sufferance by the California Air Resources Board, of all things, to try to clean up the air in Los Angeles. So they were effectively economically strong-armed to build some EVs. They didn't want to do it, but what they forgot to do is they forgot to tell the engineers to build a bad car.
Yeah,
and the engineers at the time actually built an awesome car. It was like this thing out of the Jetsons. And my friends in California handed me the pin code for it, because it had didn't even have a key, and said, come back in a few days. And I came back a convert in the mid-90s to the idea that EVs were the future of cars. And it wasn't about saving the planet. I mean, for them, it was about air quality. But it was even that car, which was by modern standards is not a very high-spec vehicle, right? Running on lead-acid batteries. Yeah. It was still this fantastic driving experience that anyone that's driven an EV understands, that they're just better things to drive. I was driving the future. And the commitment I made to myself then and there, Roscoe, in the mid-90s was I would buy an electric car from the first person who could sell me an EV that didn't sell. It was that simple. And in 2006, I think it was, I found myself at a technology conference in the US that I regularly go to, and there was this young guy called Elon Musk speaking there, mostly about SpaceX. But he had this Word document, 2-page Word document with words and a computer-generated picture of how cool the Roadster was going to be if they built it. And I could see in his eyes that he was not going to fail. And
I know you always get that about him. Yeah, there's no failure here, is there?
No, failure's not an option, right? And so I bowled up to him after he'd spoken and said, "Hey, if I order one of these cars and ship it to Australia, is that all right?" Yeah. And he said something along the lines of, "If you can deal with the obvious servicing challenges, you go right ahead." So I ordered one, right? I ordered what turned out to be Roadster number 186. It was delivered in 2008-9 time frame. And I had no idea what I was going to do with it, Roscoe, because it was a left-hand drive California spec vehicle. I discovered after I'd imported it that it's actually really hard to get left-hand drive cars legally on the road in Australia unless they're very old, right? Yeah. The rules that apply are the Australian design rules at the time your car was built, which is why the old left-hand drive classics are out there. Yeah. They were legal then, they stayed legal. But unless it's really old or a garbage truck, it's really hard to get left-hand drive legal. But I got it out here. The guys running the Hoon race in Adelaide actually got wind of the fact that I'd ordered this car, and they paid to air freight it in the belly of a 747 out to Australia just in time for me to do demo laps on the racetrack in Adelaide in the thing. It arrived 48 hours before the event that year, and so the first time I drove it was on the Adelaide racetrack, and that was great. Subsequent next year, I got to take Murray Walker for demo laps in the thing.
That's outstanding.
In that track. But the point is that left-hand drive, So the big thing I wound up doing is I could only drive it with special permits, and I got one to drive alongside the solar cars between Darwin and Adelaide in a thing called the Global Green Challenge in '09, something that the solar car guys put on to try to encourage there to be more EVs. And there were only two EVs that were actually in it that weren't the solar cars, mine and an experimental car that a university was putting together. And I just wanted to drive the Roadster from Darwin to Adelaide like it was normal.
Yeah.
To prove that that could be normal.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And at the time in 2009, that was not obvious to people that that was a thing that it would even make it, right? And of course it did, right? But there was no charging infrastructure in 2009. So I got my buddies together and they followed me down the road over the course of this event for 3 or 4 days, followed me down the road with a truck with a 3-phase genset on the back. So I was followed by my own charging infrastructure down the highway because I had to, right? Chicken and egg. I wasn't trying to prove charging infrastructure. I was trying to prove
those memes. You see those memes these days of people generators, diesel generators.
Yeah,
and the haters for diesel generators on the back of the Tesla.
Exactly. And you look, and Christ, the haters are out there. I had an interview with a journalist halfway down that event, right, in a petrol station somewhere between Adelaide, and he was giggling at my genset on the back of the vehicle, right? And we're doing this interview at a petrol station, and I said, "Look, I'm trying to prove that the car can do the job, and I'm only counting the fuel in the generator in terms of working out the fuel consumption as well, not the fuel in the truck, because how do you think the fuel in those petrol bowsers got there? Did ferries deliver?" Right? Like if you want to have a conversation, you want to level the playing field. And interesting. I did the maths, right? I drove that car from Darwin to Adelaide and it used 4 litres per 100 Ks of diesel.
Yeah, that's right.
Because gensets are efficient, it turns out.
Exactly.
And it worked. The car did it beautifully. I broke the then world record for distance on one of the legs from Alice Springs to Cooper Pedy, 501 Ks.
That was outstanding. I couldn't, I'll show you a bit of the video in the background, but that was outstanding, yeah.
And the thing is that the car that Tesla built, that Roadster, was and is awesome. It was the first EV I could buy that didn't suck. It really didn't suck. Proper little damn sports car. And Tesla did the right thing with that car, Roscoe. They built a car that was attractive and interesting and expensive because you've got to start somewhere. And you needed to start with people that had the means to buy this expensive but tremendously cool object.
That's right, yeah.
And Tesla was smart too. They didn't know how to build a car, so they didn't try. They built a drivetrain, and they put it in a car that Lotus built for them in Hethel in England. Yeah. So that car had been to 3 continents by the time it got to Adelaide. Yeah, it was built in England as what they called a glider, sent to California, drivetrain goes in it, wound up in Australia in my case.
That's just the body and the chassis only, the glider, yeah?
Yeah, literally empty. And then because Tesla had built a drivetrain, it was a really smart move. The Model S, as we appreciate, was the first time they built an end-to-end car. Yeah. But they had to prove that the drivetrain worked first, and they did. That car proved it in spades. Yeah. It really did. It's a great little sports car.
What happened to that original Tesla?
Yeah, so that car, because I couldn't permanently register it here, right? I had it in Australia for a year or so, and eventually I wound up shipping it back to the US. Because I'm incredibly fortunate, Roscoe, I did quite well in business and wound up selling my little company, little ISP called Internode, that had become big. And so we had actually started a winery, a lovely winery in Paso Robles called Brecon Estate. And so I actually shipped it back and it sat at the winery for several years. Whenever I was over there, that'd be the car I'd drive in California. And it felt like a really, it was still California registered, right?
Brilliant. Yeah.
Kind of never knew it left, right? It still had the number plate on, just kept paying the registration, put it back in California. And the beautiful thing about EVs is that if they're lying around for months, just plugged in doing nothing bad happens. They don't go off the boil. So whenever I was there, it was ready and I drove it, and eventually just wound up selling it in the States. And by then, and I claim partly because of the profile that car built in Australia, right? I mean, Tesla, when I first brought it in, kind of ignored it. Then they realized I meant it. I was going to drive from Darwin to Adelaide, and they contacted me to offer me tech support in case I needed it, because they didn't need it to break down, right? And it didn't. There was no problem with it at all. But by the time I'd sent that car back, Tesla had started up in Australia, and I think probably the fact that I dragged that car out early, I was told, had influenced their decision to set up earlier than they otherwise would have in Australia, which is great. And a couple of folks from Tesla started Tesla going in Sydney, And I bought the first Tesla Roadster that Tesla shipped to Australia that was right-hand drive, Australian road registered, number 842.
I was going to say that wasn't the end of your love affair with Roadsters,
No,
was it?
it wasn't. So I bought the first one of these things. I had Internode, so the number plate on that car was Nodester.
Yeah.
And I had a great time driving that thing around. Tesla had a salesperson in Australia at the time, and he did a great job though. He called me up one day and said, a few years after I bought that car, and said, "Tell you what, the last right-hand drive Australian delivered car ever is going to be made, and I want to sell it to you. It's going to have a really, it's going to have a lovely little plaque in the back with the signatures of the designers and your name on it. And, how'd you like the last best Roadster that's ever going to exist in Australia?" And so I bought that car, which is a bright orange one, right? Called Tesla color, called Very Orange, exactly the same color as the one that we're talking about today. Dead ringer for it. It's a beautiful color. By sheer coincidence, the same color my old company Internode has, this nice orange color. So the middle car wound up being sold back in Sydney, and I am to this day the happy owner of VIN number 1007 that sits here in Adelaide and gets driven around, especially on nice sunny days when you can take the top down and treat it as the sports car it's meant to be. And the thing is great. It's a great little car. It turns heads because it's actually such a cool looking vehicle. And the thing that's the most impressive, Roscoe, is that you drive somewhere and you get, like a teenager that looks at it, sees a Tesla logo on this thing and says, "What Tesla is that?"
It's an instant classic, isn't it? Really, I mean,
yeah,
the design,
exactly.
the operation, the build, everything. It's just instant classic. Yeah.
Right. Proper car nuts correctly say that looks a bit like a Lotus, and because well, it's a Lotus. It's an electric Lotus with Tesla drivetrain, Tesla bodywork, and yeah, it's a great little car, and it hoots along very, very happily.
Because there weren't that many built globally or even came to Australia.
No,
I was surprised when I got down to it that they built it, and then it disappeared so quickly, right?
Yeah, in the end built about 2,500. I believe they originally were building 1,000 of them, and they sold them out so fast that they actually did a deal to build some more. And so yeah, around 2,500 globally, probably most of them in the US, but certainly Australia, Europe, Japan, a few other countries wound up with some of them. And they remain classics to this day. I mean, the thing that then happened is Tesla built the Model S, which they wanted to build, the start of the kind of modern era of Tesla. But this remains kind of the antecedent to all of them. The birth of Tesla is in that car, and the history of Tesla is in that car. And to this day, it's the car that marks the start of the change, right? The start of the modern EV era. That is the beast. No two ways about it.
And you've gone on to own more Teslas since then. And look,
yes,
there's no denying. I think we agree. For me, without Tesla, we've got no EV market in the world, basically.
Exactly. And we are right. We are now finally at the point where there's now lots of people making EVs. They're all chasing Tesla, or they're all threatening to pass. Some of them may well pass them in terms of absolute volume, but no one makes a better EV than Tesla to this day, in my view, because they were born to be an electric car maker. They came out of Silicon Valley, so they get the idea that it's not a conventional car with a new motor. It's a computer on wheels.
Exactly.
And the fact that car gets better every few weeks all by itself because the software updates. This stuff that's so obvious for someone who owns a computer, but so unobvious for someone who used to just make cars.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure to this day, Elon is not at all bothered by other car companies ultimately making more EVs than him. His mission was a very rational one. He wanted to be the catalyst that made EVs be real. And ye gods, has he ever done that in spades?
Yeah. It's difficult, I guess, for the other OEMs to have a little bit of an interest or side interest when it's not your main business. And Tesla have not only made it their own business, their main business, but they've excelled at it.
Yeah, the nice thing about what Tesla's done is it's been a catalyst for the rest of the EV industry, and almost any car manufacturer these days has got a roadmap that ends in pure EVs.
Yeah.
So if that was the mission, to get the world's auto manufacturers to make EVs, then that mission is working. They're doing it. And so now the die's cast. Now we're actually going to wind up with EV everything as we should. And I think that's just fabulous. And we are finally getting everyone else into the future that I saw in the mid 1990s.
No, I just saw the Grand Tour as well, and Clarkson just went off about it, and I've just done a video on it as well because he's just called them shit. And I just he's backpedaled. Anyway. We won't worry about Amazon Clarkson. I think
Totally good, but yeah, the modern EVs are just such an obviously sensible thing. Just in this last few weeks, people like MG are now selling a new electric car for a lower price in some states than their petrol one.
Yeah.
That's the cross point I've been looking forward to. The point at which an EV has no price penalty compared to an internal combustion car is the point. That's the point at which, with a lower running cost, the only reason you should be buying an internal combustion engine car today is for the same reason you buy vinyl, right? Which is you've got some sense of nostalgia that
that's a good
the rest of us, like, buy the cheaper one that works better and costs less to run. It's not complicated, is it? And we have Tesla to thank for that.
And I mean, that was your only choice to start with, as you mentioned before, and then it's become the choice, right? So it is an amazing transition. I don't think they could have executed any better under pressure, under time, under resourced. Yeah, it's an outstanding story from both a business and technological.
It is, and again, Elon has said at times he's surprised it succeeded as well. There were moments there where it could easily have failed, and maybe even should have failed. But
I didn't buy shares. I didn't even think about buying shares at any time.
Oh, I did. I did. Yeah, that was accidentally the best share purchase I've made in my life. And interestingly, like Elon, though, that wasn't a business decision. It was an emotional one.
Yeah.
It was that, believe it or not, it was that mid-90s experience of understanding that these things were the future.
Yeah.
I thought, man, I need to be a part of this.
Yeah.
And I need to feel a part of this. And I've tried both in owning them and driving them and investing in the thing to want to be a part of it, because it is such a pivotal part of the journey towards some sort of renewable future that we might all be able to benefit from.
And for us at AmazingEV, with a dedicated used EV marketplace, we're seeing the same sort of thing. As soon as cars start to get down to that sort of affordable 25 to 35K range, even if they're new, they're going to start to push the used car price down. And that's the bracket we sort of see as really affordable for used cars. Otherwise, people are going to go out and buy new ones, where they're still going to get some reliability and long-term value out of EVs, and they're just going to make sense for day-to-day operation. So I think they make incredible sense as a used EV to get down to that bracket where they're affordable. And I don't know what you've seen, but my experience is EV owners are some of the most fastidious owners that you can possibly imagine, right? They've looked after these cars as like their firstborn, and we're seeing cars 30, 40, 50, 100,000 Ks in immaculate condition. So
yes, and the EVs are such a great thing to have a second and a third and a fourth life, because they also, just the fact that they don't have an internal combustion engine, so that they don't have the source of 95% of the running of the service expense and the failure modes of a traditional car. I think it's the thing, Roscoe, people miss. They get that the fuel you put in them is cheaper, but until they've owned one, perhaps they don't necessarily internalize just how much lower the servicing costs are.
Yeah.
And that feeds to reliability if you're buying a second-hand one. There's very little to fail.
Yeah, exactly.
We've all, if we're all, you and me are both old enough to have bought a second-hand car and then discovered that the combustion engine in thing was on its last elbows.
Yeah.
Right. The thing is that if you can, if the motor's running, the motor's going to keep running. Those things they're very, very reasonable things to expect a long and reliable life out of.
The battery life stats are coming out far better than they anticipated, and they're
exactly.
They're going to outlive they're almost going to outlive the car, which they didn't think was possible either, as well.
Exactly, so. and the reality that even if the battery is getting long in the tooth, for a battery, that doesn't mean it stops. It means the range gracefully degrades.
Exactly.
And if you started out with a car with hundreds of kilometers of range, and if your daily commute is 30 kilometers or 50 kilometers, you've lost a bit at the top. Who cares?
Thank you, Simon Hackett. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about such an iconic EV, the Tesla Roadster.
Yeah, absolute pleasure, Roscoe. Great to see you.
Thanks. See you next time.
Yeah, isn't it funny? Isn't it funny how one of the classic complaints about EVs is that idea that you'll lose the vroom vroom noise, and you do not miss it.
And I might pull down some of the road trip as well. The irony of that was Sky News were reporting on that as well. That wasn't lost on me.
Yeah, in the UK, it was Sky News UK, exactly. Yes, they were driving from Darwin to the provincial capital of Adelaide. Yeah.
As you fade away, as you fade away, as you fade away.
Like nothing I found, my mind over